The smell reaches me first. Cordite and aviation fuel layered under the usual antiseptic. A combination I haven't smelled inside a hospital in 6 years and would recognize blindfolded in a burning building. Then, the sound underneath it, 2 separate rotor signatures instead of one, heavier and lower than any medevac contract this city runs, closing fast on a trauma bay that has exactly 4 open beds and is about to need at least 6. Around me, the rest of the department keeps moving in complete ignorance of any of it. A printer chattering out lab results. A vending machine somewhere down the hall finally releasing whatever someone had been arguing with it about. The ordinary noise of a building that has no idea it's about 90 seconds from the worst night of its year. I know, before the first siren even clears the highway exit, that tonight is going to be the kind of night this hospital tells stories about for years. They told me I couldn't handle it. Dr. Holloway said it to my face, in front of an entire trauma bay, 4 minutes before a convoy of armored vehicles emptied 6 wounded men onto my floor. 90 seconds after that, a team of operators in full tactical kit walked through the same doors, looked past every surgeon in the room, and called me Commander. Let me back up. My name here is Charlotte Renner. I've worked trauma at Ridgemont for 2 years in a Level 1 center that takes the worst the highway and the harbor have to offer and rarely blinks at any of it. Ridgemont smells like cold steel and surgical scrub under the ordinary hospital antiseptic. Because the trauma wing runs its own air system separate from the rest of the building, sealed off and slightly colder, the way operating theaters always are. It sounds, on a bad night, like overlapping voices calling numbers across each other, pressures, rates, units of blood. A rhythm that outsiders hear as chaos and insiders hear as music, with a time signature. The light over the resuscitation bays is shadowless, surgical grade, built so nothing on a patient's body can hide from it, which I have always found more comforting than harsh, because shadows are where bad things go to be missed. And the floor in the trauma wing is poured concrete sealed with epoxy, no give to it at all, the kind of floor that tells you instantly, through your boots, exactly how much weight just hit it. To the residents, it's just flooring. To me, it's been telling me things about incoming patients since before they're even through the doors. The same way it used to, on a different continent, in a different uniform, under a different name entirely. I know which bay has the fastest line to the blood bank, and which elevator the helicopter team prefers. The same way I used to know which corridor of a forward operating base flooded first when the rains came. Nobody asks why a trauma nurse memorizes a building's bones that thoroughly. They assume it's competence. It is also, quietly, something closer to muscle memory I never bothered retiring along with the rest of it. I am good at this job in a way that draws very little attention, which has always been the arrangement I prefer, and which has served me well in every uniform I've ever worn. Visible or otherwise, I can run a resuscitation bay with the calm, flat cadence of someone counting out a grocery list, because panic has never once made a bleeding patient stop bleeding faster. I keep a folding knife and a tourniquet clipped inside my scrub pocket that has nothing to do with hospital policy and everything to do with a habit I never filed paperwork to retire. I stand at the head of the bay instead of the foot, where I can see the whole room and the whole room has to look past me to see anything else, and nobody has ever asked why that's where I gravitate. I count the people in a packed waiting room the way most nurses count occupied beds. And when an overhead page interrupts the floor, I'm already 2 steps into motion before the second word finishes. A half beat ahead of colleagues who've worked here 3 times longer than I have. I chose Ridgemont because a busy civilian trauma center is the last place anyone goes looking for a retired naval officer. and because the work here is real in a way that lets me use everything I used to know without ever having to explain where I learned it. The version of me that used to hold real rank over real people doesn't introduce herself anymore. She just shows up, quietly, inside whatever competence the moment requires, and goes home afterward to a small apartment with no photographs on the walls. Dr. Garrett Holloway runs trauma surgery at Ridgemont the way some men run a kitchen they've never once cleaned themselves. He's brilliant with a scalpel and insufferable about everything that happens before he picks one up, and he has decided, somewhere in our 2 years of working together, that I am a useful person to be condescending toward, possibly because I never once give him the satisfaction of reacting to it. He arrives every shift mid-complaint, already 3 sentences into some grievance about staffing or equipment, his loops pushed up onto his forehead like a crown he's forgotten to take off. The humiliation that started the night came 40 minutes before the convoy did, over a patient with a slow GI bleed whose vitals I didn't like the trend on. I flagged it the way I always flag things, quietly, factually, at his shoulder instead of in front of the family. Holloway looked at the monitor, looked at me, and told the room, loud enough for the charge nurse 2 bays over to hear it, that he didn't need a trauma nurse playing surgeon on his service, that some of us should remember who actually carries the license that matters, and that he'd appreciate it if I kept my opinions to myself, unless specifically asked. A resident smirked, the kind of smirk that costs nothing in the moment, and everything later. I said, "Copy that," and nothing else, because the only number I cared about was the patient's hemoglobin, not Holloway's audience. And 25 minutes later, that patient decompensated exactly the way the trend line had predicted, and Holloway took him to the or himself, rattled, and never once mentioned that a nurse had flagged it first. Nobody in that room said a word in my defense. Nobody ever does. I stopped expecting them to a long time ago, on a different continent entirely, and the lesson never stopped being true here. I charted the rest of my notes on that patient in silence, the way I always do, and let the comment dissolve into the ordinary background noise of a shift, because reacting to it would have cost more than absorbing it ever did. I took 5 minutes in the equipment closet behind sterile processing, because it's the one room in this building with a door that locks and no window for anyone to look through. I let my shoulders drop the half-inch I never allow myself on the floor, and I thought, the way I always do in small locked rooms, about the Hindu Kush. 2017, the cold that got into your bones before it got into anything else. A master chief named Daniel Okoye, the most decorated corpsman I ever served with, who taught me to check a pulse with 2 fingers instead of my eyes, because eyes lie under pressure and fingers never do. I thought about the rank I used to carry before Charlotte Renner was ever a plan, a title I haven't heard spoken aloud directed at me in 6 years, and how strange it is that a single word can still feel like a key fitting into a lock I thought I'd welded shut. Staying small here is not modesty. It's arithmetic. The same arithmetic it's always been. The people who knew that title are mostly the people I couldn't bring home, and I have already spent every life I was willing to spend wearing it. Staying invisible at Ridgemont is the safest decision I've made for everyone around me, not just for myself. And on most nights, I believe that completely. I splashed water on my face, dried my hands twice, the second time longer than necessary, and went back to the floor. An hour later, Holloway found a second target, the way he always seemed to find one whenever the floor went quiet enough to let him. An elderly man named Frank Dussault had come in from a fall, and when his daughter mentioned, almost as an aside, that he was a Korean War veteran who'd been having episodes of confusion for weeks, Holloway barely looked up from his tablet before pronouncing it likely dementia and ordering a basic head CT. Nothing further. I noted Dussault's pupils, unequal by a margin most people wouldn't catch without looking for it, and the faint slur at the edge of his speech that didn't match a simple fall. The particular asymmetry that means something is bleeding slowly under the skull, instead of nowhere at all. I could have pushed, could have said the words subdural and anticoagulated loud enough to be heard over Holloway's tablet, and I chose again not to make the room about me. His daughter looked at me with the particular hope people reserve for the only calm person in a chaotic place, and for one long second, I nearly broke my own rule. Something is coming, I remember thinking, with no evidence at all. Just the old pressure at the base of my skull that used to arrive before bad news did, back when bad news arrived by radio instead of by chart. I didn't know yet what it was. I only knew that feeling had never once been wrong, not in 6 years of testing it against ordinary Tuesdays. I felt the vibration through the concrete before the overhead page even finished announcing a mass casualty incoming. 2 rotor signatures, both heavy, both military. Neither one a contract this city had ever used before. And underneath the rotor noise, ground vehicles, armored, moving in a formation no civilian ambulance company would ever drive in. I pressed my shoulder blades flat against the supply wall by the trauma bay doors, hands loose, already counting in my head the resources 6 critical patients would need against the 4 bays we actually had open. Running the math the way I used to run it, standing in a tent with a radio crackling bad news through static. Not my call anymore, I told myself. The same lie I'd been telling myself in this building for 2 years. And for the first time since I'd walked through Ridgemont's doors, I didn't believe a single word of it. The convoy hit the bay doors at a dead run, armored vehicles still rolling when the back doors opened. And 6 men came off them in various states of catastrophic injury, gunshot wounds, blast fragmentation. 1 man with a junctional hemorrhage that had already soaked through 2 field dressings. The operators carrying them moved with the brutal efficiency of people who had done this exact thing under far worse conditions, shouting injury reports in clipped, precise language that most of the civilian staff couldn't fully parse. Mechanism, location, time since injury. The shorthand of people who've given this same report 100 times before and know exactly which words save the most seconds. Holloway took one look at the volume of catastrophic trauma flooding through his doors at once and froze for one visible, fatal half-second before he started barking contradictory orders nobody could execute fast enough. The monitors in all 4 open bays began alarming within seconds of each other, a chorus with no harmony in it at all, and somewhere in the noise a resident dropped a tray of instruments that nobody had time to pick back up. I stepped forward to start directing triage, the only thing that mattered in that moment, and Holloway rounded on me in front of the entire incoming team and said it. Loud. Certain, the words he'd apparently been building toward all night. "She can't handle this," he said, jabbing a finger toward me without looking at me directly. "Get her out of my bay." Security had me by the arm and out into the hallway inside of 20 seconds, the warming blankets I'd been holding still clutched against my chest. Useless. My badge clipping against the doorframe as they walked me through it. I stood there and listened through the doors as the chaos inside got worse instead of better, as alarms layered over alarms, as someone called out a pressure dropping into numbers that don't leave much room. I listened to 6 men's worth of trauma being mismanaged by a room with no command structure, and I made my decision in 2 words, out loud, to no one. Not again. Then I moved. I didn't make it 3 steps before the lead operator found me first, broad-shouldered, blood on his hands that wasn't his, moving through the hallway with the specific economy of someone who has cleared rooms for a living. He scanned the corridor in a single sweep, the way men like that always do, cataloging every face and dismissing most of them in the same half-second, his eyes skipping past 2 doctors and a charge nurse without slowing down at all. His eyes landed on me and stopped. He didn't ask my name. He said one word, low, certain, like he was confirming something he'd already half-suspected the moment he saw how I was standing. Commander. Nobody in that hallway reacted to the word, because nobody in that hallway knew what it meant directed at a trauma nurse in scrubs. I looked at the blankets in my arms, then at my own hands, steady in a way they hadn't been in 2 years inside this building. The operator's gaze didn't waver, didn't blink, didn't carry a flicker of doubt, only the flat, total certainty of a man reporting to the person he actually answers to. The kind of certainty that doesn't ask permission to exist. I set the blankets down. I pushed off the wall. I didn't walk fast, but my spine straightened with every step. The old posture finding me again like it had never actually left, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I was standing exactly the way I was built to stand. I walked back into that trauma bay and the entire chaos reorganized around me before I'd said a single word. The way a room does when the people in tactical kit recognize a structure they already know how to obey. "Talk to me," I said to the nearest operator, and he gave me a 6-second report cleaner than anything Holloway's residents had managed in the last 6 minutes. I triaged the 6 wounded by survivability and severity in under 30 seconds. The junctional bleed first, then the sucking chest wound, then the rest in descending order, and issued assignments to both my own staff and the operators simultaneously, because in that moment there was no meaningful difference between them. "I'm not your commander anymore," I said, mostly to myself, to the part of me that still expected an answer. But I remember exactly how to run this. And then, the careful, contained voice I keep wrapped around myself dropped away for 1 sentence before snapping back into something colder and more useful. I went to the junctional bleed myself. I packed the wound with a hemostatic dressing seated directly against the femoral origin, 2 fingers above the inguinal ligament, applying direct pressure with my whole body weight while calling out crystalloid volumes to a resident who was, for the first time all night, actually listening. I called for a second team to needle decompress the chest wound in Bay 2 without ever turning to check whether they'd done it, because I already knew, from the changed sound of that patient's breathing 30 seconds later, that they had. A third operator's abdominal wound needed pressure and a direct line to the or more than it needed anything I could do myself, and I said as much in 4 words, and watched 2 residents move on it, without hesitating the way they'd hesitated on everything else that night. Holloway stood at the periphery of his own trauma bay, no longer giving orders to anyone, watching 6 critical patients get systematically stabilized by a structure he had tried to remove from the room 4 minutes earlier. The lead operator followed my instructions without question, handing me what I needed before I finished asking for it, the same way men used to a long time ago in a much colder place. Master Chief Okoye's voice surfaced in my head the way it always does in moments like this. Fingers, not eyes, and beneath my hands, the bleeding finally slowed to something survivable. When the last patient stabilized, the lead operator straightened, looked at the room, and said it again. This time loud enough for the whole bay to hear. Not a question. Not a request. A fact stated for the record. "She's our commander," he said. "She led the task force that trained half this team. Every man on that floor is alive tonight because of protocols she wrote with her own hands in a place none of you have clearance to hear about. He didn't perform it. He said it the way you state a patient's blood type. Simple, load-bearing, true. And nobody in the room had the standing left to question a word of it." Holloway's face went through several stages of color before settling on none at all. the practiced authority draining out of him in real time. He didn't say anything. There was nothing left in his expression to argue with. Then, one by one, the operators who were still standing turned toward me, came to attention despite the blood and the gear and the wreckage of the night, and saluted. 5 of them, simultaneous, the sound of tactical vests and weapon slings shifting in the half-second their arms came up. I returned it the way the body never actually forgets a gesture it performed 10,000 times, no matter how many years you spend convincing yourself you're someone who's never had reason to. The staff watched in total silence, the kind a trauma bay almost never produces. Frank Dussault's daughter, still in the hallway awaiting his scan results, pressed a hand to her mouth. The resident who'd smirked at Holloway's joke earlier stood frozen by the supply cart, and I caught her eye for exactly 1 second, long enough to watch her finally understand the shape of everything she dismissed all night without ever once questioning it. I didn't make a speech. I didn't look at Holloway again. The hospital's chief medical officer, summoned by an administrator who clearly understood the gravity of 6 armed federal-adjacent operators standing at attention in his trauma bay, would later quietly inform me that Holloway's handling of the incident, along with 2 prior incidents involving my own documented concerns, would be part of a formal review I would never see the outcome of, and didn't particularly need to. I picked the warming blankets back up off the floor, where security had set them down, and carried them in to Frank Dussault myself, because that was the job I'd been doing when the night started, and it felt right to finish it. His scan had come back exactly the way I'd suspected. A small subdural, caught early enough to matter. His daughter thanked me. I told her it was nothing, and in the particular arithmetic of the life I used to live, it genuinely was. I tucked the blanket around his shoulders the way I would have on any ordinary Tuesday, my hands steady, the rotor noise long gone from outside the windows, the floor under my boots the same poured concrete it had always been, the same floor that had told me, hours earlier, exactly how much weight was about to land on it. I have a job to do. I am still doing it. If this story moved you, or stayed with you a little longer than you expected, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to the channel. We tell the stories of quiet heroes who never asked to be recognized, and never needed to be. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one reaches.